Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you are managing to stay warm and that somebody is assisting you in your effort to clean out a driveway if you have one, or sidewalks, or perhaps you have some homeowners association or condominium association agreement where that is handled. All that to say, it is winter for sure, but I'm glad that you're finding a bit of time to tune in here. And I hope you were able to tune in to our service on Sunday. Now, the theme of our service on Sunday is, I hope, a kind of springboard into future considerations, specifically around the need to be adaptive. That's what I'll say. We could call it pivoting, changing, reconsidering, but really it's adaptation. I am talking about the passage where Jesus sees what happens to John the Baptizer and realizes, maybe proceeding in the way that I had considered next to John, along with John, maybe that location, maybe that approach isn't the best, the most efficacious right now. And so Jesus relocates. Not to Nazareth, which would have made sense because it's his hometown. He knows the people there, probably has some resources he can rely on. Instead, he relocates from Nazareth, right? He initially moves from where John is, east of Jerusalem out in the wilderness, goes to Nazareth, but then relocates to Capernaum. Capernaum is an interesting choice. It's more multicultural than Nazareth, to be sure. It's a trading post, a city or town or village by the sea. Bigger than Nazareth, but we're not talking a megalopolis here. However, Jesus builds in Capernaum the beginnings of the ministry that we associate with Jesus, which, based on what I just said, means that from the beginning, it was a message, it was a movement that was intended not just for one audience, but for multiple audiences. There was something universal and binding and full of promise for many peoples, not just the children of Israel. And so I think it's important to name that because it marks a significant transition in Jewish prophetic thought, of which Jesus stands in a long line of. We know that in Isaiah and elsewhere in the Hebrew scriptures, there's also these openings to other peoples and nations. And so Jesus, we could say, is the embodiment of that promise and that hope that we find in the prophetic text. We, like Jesus and like the prophets before him, are in a similar position at First St. Andrews United. Yes, we are United Church people. All of us would identify as Christian. However, what that means for us in 2026 and what it meant for the people in 1925, probably not the same, right? There are probably some major differences between that identification now and that identification in 1925, as it should be. The world as we know it now looks very different, feels different. Our understandings have been enhanced by other perspectives. It is bigger than it was in 1925, and we are looking down at some problematic things that have occurred in our world, not only in the United States, but throughout. This is not to say there weren't terrible things happening in 1925 as well, but I think the scale and the complexity of our situation is to some extent unprecedented, partly because of the technologies that have burst onto the scene in the last few decades. So we are where we are, at a precipice, if you will. But Jesus too had to adapt and change his plans. And so how are we being invited to reconsider and adapt, and to treat that adaptation as a spiritual practice in itself? Being flexible, being open, being patient. You don't have to adopt something immediately, but neither are you called to reject something immediately unless it is causing direct harm to somebody that you love or communities near and far. I do think it's important to discern that And I rely on all generations to help as we try to build that discernment into our community and into our life together. However, we also have to be prepared to take steps into arenas and into areas and spaces that we didn't think we would be. We are gifted with light, specifically the light of Christ in our faith community. But that light is not intended to be gathered around only. That is an important part of the light. It can provide warmth and illumination. But it is also intended to be carried with you wherever you go so that your way forward can be illuminated. And so I believe we are being invited to walk into new places, which may be a bit dark for us because we don't have knowledge or understanding of some of these places, but we do have that light which will shine into these spaces and help us acquire the knowledge we need to go forward and make the changes we need. I think we're well positioned, and I have not heard anything but enthusiasm about some of these changes. We don't know how they're going to feel or what they're going to look like entirely, but we're ready to make them. We see the benefits already, the return on our investments and our willingness to take those steps forward. And so I encourage you to keep doing that with us. Take steps into places that you're not aware of or that you don't know much about, not with arrogance, or don't be overconfident, right? But with humility and with that light of Christ, because Jesus had to change, the prophets of old had to change, and we too are being invited to adapt and change what we thought was going to be the case so that we can receive all that God is doing already in our world. Thanks for joining me today. I hope again that you're staying warm. That's a change I'd like to see. I wouldn't mind it being a little warmer, but anyway, I hope you're staying warm, and I do look forward to seeing you on Sunday and of course next week for our postscript. Take care.